This past week in our church-wide Bible reading project known as Immerse, we dove into the book of Esther. And oh, what an intriguing story this book relates. In fact, the more you know about the book of Esther, the more intriguing the story becomes. Let me share with you 10 fast facts in this over-my-shoulder video to that end, to deepen our intrigue. We'll do it in reverse order, starting with fact number 10. There's 66 books in our Bible, but only 2 of them are named after women. Obviously, the book of Esther is one of them. Do you remember the other? That's right, the book of Ruth. Fact number 9. There are 2 versions of the book of Esther. That's right. Here's one of them. And, oh look, somewhat later in our Bible, another version. What's up with that? Well, the original story of the book of Esther was written in Hebrew, and the canonical edition of Esther, well, that is based on the Hebrew manuscripts. Some years later, there was a translation of those manuscripts into Greek. That translation was known as the Septuagint, and it's that rendering that was included in what's known here as the Apocrypha. Now, the Apocryphal edition is about 107 verses longer. That is, there are 6 segments of material that are added to the Apocryphal edition on top of what made up the Hebrew version. What makes up those segments is very interesting. We may talk a bit more about that toward the close of this video. Fact number 8. There are only a very few of the 39 books in the Old Testament that are not quoted somewhere in the New Testament, sometimes many times. But Esther, the book of Esther, is one of those very few not quoted. Fact number 7. The book of Esther is the party book in the Bible. It's full of feasting and banqueting. In fact, depending on how you break it down, how you count them, there's somewhere between 8 and 10 distinct feasts or festivals or parties or banquets in the book of Esther. There's only 10 chapters there, and the 10th chapter is very brief. There's a lot of partying going on here. What's up with that? Well, the book of Esther is about how the balance of power shifts. The Persians seem set to exterminate the Jews in Persia, but the tables are turned, spoiler alert, and the Jews escape this genocide and turn the tables of fate on the Persian people themselves. In the first half of the book, the first half of the instances of banqueting recording in Esther, it's the Persians who are partying. But as the tables turn, the last half of references in the book of Esther, it's only the Jews, it's always the Jews who are celebrating. Fact number 6. On the Jewish calendar, there are a number of high festival and feast days and times. The Feast of Purim is one of them, and you can find its beginnings here in the book of Esther. It celebrates the Jews' deliverance from the Persians as related in this book, the storyline of Esther. You can read about that in Esther chapter 9. Now, what's interesting is the Feast of Purim comes toward the close of the Jewish year. We finish the year celebrating with great joy, as it were, as a Jew. But the Feast of the Passover is what marks the beginning of a new year in the religious calendar of things in the Jewish life. These two have much in common, and yet at the same time have a bit of a difference. Purim is high celebration, and Passover, while it has its elements of celebration, is also a bit more somber and a bit more, shall we say, even humble. Fact number 5. Comedy and humor. Now, genocide, extermination of a people, well, this is anything but humorous. But the way the book of Esther relates this horrific crisis can be full of humor at times. You might even call it comedy, and in places, dark comedy. I think a fair parallel is a movie that came out a number of years ago that you may be familiar with. It's entitled Life is Beautiful. It's the beautiful story of a man who seeks to share in such ways reality with his young son as to shield his spirit from the horrors of the Holocaust. They find themselves in the Nazi concentration camp, and they find themselves out, and well, it appears that life is over for them, and quite literally the father lays down his life for his son. He spares him the horrors as he can with humor and joy and lightheartedness and reframing things so that things appear comical, literally till the point that he dies, and does so even in his death. That's very much a parallel with the book of Esther. The Jews, as they remember this horrific time in their past, they recall it with a kind of humor and comedy that enables them to not only bear the load, but to celebrate life. Life is beautiful. Fact number 4. We mentioned horror. Chapter 5, verse 14 talks about the personal horror that the book revolves around. An evil Persian wants to have Mordecai, a good Jew, impaled or hanged on a pole 75 feet high. He wants people far away to be able to see what's going on here. Well, as things turn out, Mordecai is not impaled, but Haman. Spoiler alert. Does that remind you of something else in the Bible? That's right, the storyline of the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those books in the New Testament relate this story. And it's Jesus who is, shall we say, impaled, placed on a cross. And what will happen to Jesus? Will he be delivered? What will the Father do with his Son in this kind of predicament? That was what was at stake here with Israel, God's Son, here in Persia. And God gave them deliverance, just as our Father gives us deliverance through this Christ on the cross. Fact number 3. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah function together as a unit. They tell something of the story of those Jews who had been in exile in Persia now being allowed to go back to Israel and reestablish life in their homeland. But the question remains, what about those who remained in Persia? What about those who didn't leave? Are they lesser Jews? Are they those who just completely compromised their faith and lived among those other people? No, the book of Esther completes the story. Ezra and Nehemiah tell the story of Jews who went back to Israel. But those who are left behind in Persia, the book of Esther says, no, they have held true to their faith too. God remains interested in them. As you read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther, see how they complement each other and present two sides of the same coin. Those who are left behind in Persia, Ezra would say, well, they're in the world, but they're not of it, to steal a New Testament phraseology of things. Fact number 2. The very structure of the book of Esther is remarkable. It's extremely complex. Suffice it to say that it's a chiastic structure that has 2 chiastic structures in it. What does that mean? Let me try to give you a simple chart to explain it. The book of Esther has 10 chapters. When we read it from beginning to end, 10 chapters. But its high point doesn't come at the end, but rather in chapter 6. We call that the middle. That storyline breaks the story of Esther into 2 neat halves. And the first half finds its climax in chapter 3 with the plot that is made by Haman against the Jewish people. And the latter half of the book finds its climax in chapter 8, where that plot is undone, and indeed Haman himself is undone. It's a wonderful way of structuring a book. There are 2 stories within a greater storyline, and they all have points in common from beginning to end, matching over and over until they get to the central point. The tables are turned on those who would do God's people harm. Chiasm. Fact number 1. There's absolutely no mention of God in the book of Esther. That's right, not one time. It's the only book in the Bible that makes no reference to God at all. What's up with that? Well, you could say that that's exactly the point. The people that are in this peril are asking themselves this question: where is God in all of this? The silence would appear to be deafening. But as you have eyes to see how the events play out, then you know that God is very much present and active. If you want to know more about that, listen to this Sunday's sermon. That is, God willing. Grace and peace be with us all. Oh, about those extra additions in the other version of Esther, guess what those additions are all about? They're all about how God was acting during this time. It's as if the Jewish people, knowing the story of the book of Esther, wanted to make it explicit. Oh yes, we know where God is. He's living and active right here among us. Go find an edition of Apocrypha and read the book of Esther there. Compare it with the one in your canonical Bible. Grace and peace be with us all.